In 1986, Oprah Winfrey was offered a deal that most people in television would have accepted immediately. It would make her wealthy. It would make her even more famous, and it would remove almost all of the risk from her career. There was only one problem. The deal required her to give up ownership of the thing that made her powerful, her show. The executives wanted control. Oprah said no. At the time, people in television thought that decision was almost impossible to understand. Because in the world Oprah was entering, hosts did not own their programs. They hosted them. Networks owned the infrastructure. Networks controlled distribution. Networks collected the long-term value. The person sitting in front of the camera might become a household name, but the company behind the scenes usually owned the empire being built. Oprah was being offered the thing most people spend their entire careers chasing. Security, money, a guaranteed place at the top. Instead, she chose uncertainty. And the reason she made that choice had nothing to do with television. It started much earlier. Before Oprah Winfrey became one of the most recognizable women in the world, she understood what it felt like not to have control. She spent part of her childhood in rural Mississippi with her grandmother, living in a home without running water. Her early life was shaped by instability, poverty, and circumstances she couldn't control. She learned something from those years. Having nothing can teach you the value of owning something. So when she entered the entertainment industry, success alone was never the final goal. She didn't just want to be the person people watched. She wanted to be the person who decided what happened next. That mindset would eventually lead her to one of the most important decisions in television history. The executives believed they were offering Oprah a career-changing opportunity. They didn't realize she was looking at a much bigger question. Not how much can this show pay me, but who benefits if this show becomes bigger than anyone expects? Because Oprah understood something that many entertainers discover too late. Fame can disappear. A contract can expire. An audience can move on. But ownership creates something that lasts. So instead of signing away control, Oprah created something most people in her position would never have attempted. Her own production company. She called it Harpo. Her name Oprah, spelled backward. The name was simple. The idea behind it was not. Harpo would produce the Oprah Winfrey Show. And Harpo would own it. That decision made Oprah the first Black woman in American television history to own and produce her own nationally syndicated talk show. But what made the decision extraordinary wasn't just what she gained. It was what she was willing to risk. Because ownership changes everything. When you don't own something, failure belongs to someone else. When you do own it, failure belongs to you. If the show struggled, Oprah couldn't blame a network executive. If production costs increased, she couldn't simply walk away. If audiences stopped watching, the responsibility would be hers. She wasn't just taking control of the rewards. She was accepting the consequences. Then came the moment that proved she had made the right decision. The Oprah Winfrey Show became one of the biggest television programs in America. But the real power wasn't just the ratings. It was the relationship Oprah built with viewers. People trusted her. They listened to her. They believed that when someone sat across from her, they would be treated with honesty and empathy. That trust became something incredibly valuable. Because Oprah wasn't just creating a television show. She was creating a platform. Authors appeared on the program and saw their books transformed into bestsellers. Unknown individuals shared personal stories that reached millions. Important conversations about health, family, success, and personal struggles entered homes across the country. The show became bigger than entertainment. It became influence. And behind that influence was the company Oprah owned. Harpo wasn't simply producing episodes. It was building an asset. Every year the show continued. Every new distribution deal, every new opportunity, every expansion. The decision she made in that boardroom continued creating value. The woman who was once offered a chance to become wealthy by giving up ownership had instead built wealth by keeping it. For decades, it looked like Oprah had solved the hardest problem in entertainment. She had built the empire and controlled it. She had won the game. Which is why what happened next surprised people. Because after spending years building one of the most successful careers in television history, Oprah decided to risk it all again. Not on another show, not on another interview series, but on an entire television network. In 2011, Oprah owned the Oprah Winfrey Network in partnership with Discovery Communications. The idea was enormous. She wasn't creating one program anymore. She was creating an entire destination. A network built around her vision, with her audience, with her understanding of storytelling. On paper, it seemed like the natural next step. If Oprah could build one of the most successful shows in television, why couldn't she build an entire channel? But there was a problem. A successful show and a successful network are completely different businesses. A show needs viewers for a few hours each week. A network needs viewers every day. It needs dozens of programs. It needs a clear identity. It needs people to choose it over channels that already have decades of loyalty behind them. And this time, Oprah's reputation could not guarantee success. The launch was very difficult. Ratings were lower than expected. Some programs failed to connect with audiences. Critics began questioning whether Oprah had taken on a challenge even she couldn't overcome. And because her name was attached to the network, every problem became personal. This wasn't just a struggling business. It was a public test of whether Oprah Winfrey could build something that existed beyond herself. Reports described the network as losing tens of millions of dollars in its early years. For many executives, this would have been the point where the strategy changed. Sell. Reduce losses. Move on. After all, Oprah already had everything most people spend their lives trying to achieve. She had money, influence, a legendary career. Why risk her reputation defending a failing network? Because walking away would have meant abandoning the exact principle that built her career. Ownership only matters when things become difficult. Anyone can stay when something is successful. The real test is what happens when success disappears. So Oprah stayed. And she didn't stay from a distance. She became more involved. She studied what was working and what wasn't. She changed the direction of the network. One of the biggest lessons became clear. People did not automatically watch something just because Oprah's name was attached. The brand could attract attention, but the content still had to earn loyalty. So OWN began focusing on programming that matched the connection Oprah had spent decades building with audiences. Stories about transformation, relationships, personal struggles, real people, real experiences. The network also found a major turning point through partnerships with creators who understood their audience. One of the most important was Tyler Perry. His original programming helped bring stronger viewership and gave OWN a clearer identity. Slowly, the network changed. Not through one dramatic overnight victory, but years of adjustment. And that is where many people miss about rebuilding an empire. The comeback usually looks boring while it's happening. It is meetings, corrections, failed ideas, new strategies, patience. The public sees the final result. They rarely see the years spent fixing what wasn't working. But Oprah stayed through those years. Eventually, the network turned around. OWN became profitable. The company that critics once questioned became proof that even a massive setback could be recovered. But Oprah had one more move to make. In 2020, she purchased Discovery's remaining stake in OWN. The woman who had fought for ownership decades earlier now controlled the majority of an entire network. And suddenly, the entire story connected. From 1986 to Harpo in 2011 to OWN in 2020. The same idea repeated across 3 different decades. Own what you build. Because there is another version of Oprah Winfrey's story. A version where she still becomes famous, still becomes successful, still becomes one of television's biggest personalities. But she spent her career building companies that belonged to someone else. She created value, while someone else owns the future. That version of the story would still be impressive, but it wouldn't be hers. Instead, Oprah chose the harder path. The path where the rewards are bigger because the responsibility is bigger. The path where mistakes are public because the decisions are yours. The path where failure doesn't mean you leave. It means you rebuild. Her empire wasn't created because every decision was perfect. OWN proves that. Her empire was created because she refused to surrender control when things became difficult. The lesson isn't simply that Oprah Winfrey became successful. Millions of people become successful. The difference is what she did when success arrived. She protected it. She owned it. And when the empire she built faced its hardest moments, she refused to give it up. Because the most important decision isn't the one that creates an empire. It's the one that determines whether you keep it. In 2009, Nicki was standing at the exact moment most artists dreamt of. A record label wanted her. A major opportunity was finally within reach. After years of being overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed, she had what thousands of aspiring artists spend their entire lives chasing. A seat at the table. But before she signed the deal that would introduce her to the world, Nicki made a decision that most new artists would never have thought to make. She fought for what she would keep, not just what she would earn. The difference between those two things would define her entire career. Because in the music industry, becoming famous and becoming powerful are not the same thing. An artist can sell millions of records and still have very little control over the empire they helped create. The money can be there. The recognition can be there. The fans can be there. But ownership, that is where the real battle begins. And years before Nicki became one of the most recognizable female rappers in the world, she was already thinking about that battle. Before the pink wigs, the chart records, the awards, and the global fanbase, there was a woman trying to convince the industry that she belonged. Born Annika Tanya Marriage in Trinidad and Tobago, Nicki moved to Queens, New York, as a child. Her early life was shaped by uncertainty. She has spoken openly about growing up in a household affected by financial struggles and instability, experiences that influenced the way she viewed security, independence, and money. For many artists, success means finally escaping the struggle. For Nicki, success meant something more specific. Never being powerless again. That difference mattered. Because when she entered the music industry, she wasn't just chasing fame. She was trying to build something she controlled. And the first major test came when opportunity finally arrived. In 2009, after years of releasing mixtapes and building attention online, Nicki signed with Young Money Entertainment, the label connected to Lil Wayne. For many emerging artists, this would have been the moment to celebrate. A major label. A major artist supporting you. A chance to reach millions. Most people would have signed whatever contract was placed in front of them. Because when you are still trying to prove yourself, the opportunity itself feels like the victory. But Nicki understood something many new artists learned too late. A record deal is not just about getting your music heard. It is about deciding who benefits when that music becomes valuable. The music industry has always had a complicated relationship with ownership. Labels invest money into developing artists. Artists create the work that generates that money. The conflict comes when success arrives, and both sides realize the thing they helped build is worth far more than it was when the agreement was signed. A struggling artist and a superstar often have the same contract, but they don't have the same leverage. Nicki entered that world, already thinking about the future. She negotiated to protect certain rights and income streams rather than simply accepting every traditional term offered to new artists. At the time, it was not a headline-making moment. Most people watching her career had no idea it had happened. But behind the scenes, it was a glimpse into the way she thought. She wasn't only asking, "How do I become successful?" She was asking, "When success comes, how much of it will actually belong to me?" That question would follow her for the rest of her career. Then something happened that changed the balance of power. Nicki became successful. Not slowly. She became one of the most influential female rappers of her generation. Her distinctive voice, her visual identity, her ability to create characters and unforgettable moments, her connection with fans. Everything about her career became recognizable. But success created a new problem. The bigger she became, the more valuable she became to everyone around her. And that created a question many successful artists eventually face. What happens when the person generating the value does not control all of the value? This is one of the oldest conflicts in entertainment. The artist becomes the brand. The brand becomes the business. But ownership often remains complicated. Nicki has spoken over the years about disagreements, challenges, and frustrations involved in navigating the industry as one of its biggest stars. Because reaching the top does not automatically mean you control the mountain. Sometimes it means the fight changes. When you are unknown, you fight for an opportunity. When you become successful, you fight to protect what you built. Most people see a superstar and think the difficult part is getting there. But for many entertainers, the harder battle begins after arrival. Because once an artist becomes valuable, everyone wants a piece of the empire. The question becomes, how much of yourself are you willing to give away in exchange for growth? Nicki's answer, consistently, was to build more things she could control. Not only music, not only performances, an entire brand. She expanded beyond being an artist and began treating her name as a business. That included ventures in fashion, beauty, fragrances, partnerships, and other investments. The goal was not simply to make money from music. The goal was to create multiple streams of ownership. Because an artist's career can change. A song can stop charting. A trend can disappear. But a business built around a personal brand can continue beyond a single moment. That was the strategy. Don't just be valuable inside someone else's company. Become valuable because of what you own. Eventually, Nicki took another step that revealed how much her thinking had evolved. She created her own imprint, heavy on the grind entertainment. The move represented something bigger than starting another company. It represented a shift. Instead of only being the person being developed by the industry, she could also become someone who developed others. The person who once needed someone to open the door could now create doors. That is one of the clearest signs of building an empire. The transition from participant to owner. But perhaps the most important lesson from Nicki's career is that ownership is rarely a single decision. It is a series of decisions. Every contract, every partnership, every business move, every negotiation. Each one asks the same question. Who controls the future? Because the music industry has a long history of artists creating enormous value while having limited control over the assets they created. The songs become timeless. The artist becomes legendary, but the financial benefits can flow elsewhere. Owning valuable rights, especially the original recordings known as masters, has become one of the most important conversations in modern music. Those recordings can generate revenue for decades. They can be licensed, sold, passed down. They can become assets that outlive the moment they were created. For artists, controlling those assets can completely change the future. And that is why ownership became such an important theme in Nicki's career. Not because every decision was perfect, not because every battle was easy, but because she understood the stakes. Nicki has acknowledged that, like anyone building something over decades, there are decisions she would approach differently with hindsight. That is part of creating anything at a massive scale. There are no perfect careers. There are only lessons. But one pattern has remained consistent. From her earliest negotiations to her later business moves, Nicki repeatedly pushed toward the same goal. Control the things you create. Because fame can make people notice you. Talent can make people respect you. But ownership determines what remains after the attention fades. There is another version of Nicki's story. A version where she becomes famous. A version where she sells records, performs around the world, and becomes one of the biggest names in music. But every major decision about her future belonged to someone else. Someone else owns the opportunity. Someone else owns the assets. Someone else controls what happens next. That version would still be successful. But it would not be an empire. Because an empire is not only measured by what you build. It is measured by what you refuse to surrender. Nicki's career was never just about becoming a star. It was about becoming the person who held the keys to what that star created. And that may be the most important decision she made long before the world knew her name. She didn't just want a place in the industry. She wanted a piece of what she helped build. Because the greatest power isn't simply creating something valuable. It's making sure it stays yours. In 2025, after 37 years at the top of fashion, Wintour did something almost nobody expected. She stepped down. The woman who had controlled American Vogue since 1988 was leaving the job that made her famous. And immediately, the question became, was Wintour finally giving up her empire? Because for decades, Vogue was not just a magazine. It was a power center. A single cover could change a designer's career. A single decision could determine which trends became important and which disappeared. Celebrities wanted her approval. Fashion houses wanted her attention. The industry had spent years trying to understand one thing. How did one editor gain that much influence? But the more interesting question was the one nobody was asking. Why would someone at the very top walk away? The answer revealed the real difference between having a powerful position and owning the system around it. When Wintour arrived at American Vogue in 1988, she wasn't inheriting a failing magazine. She was inheriting something more difficult. A legendary magazine that risked becoming predictable. Vogue had prestige. It had history. But Anna believed something that would define her entire career. A brand does not stay powerful by protecting what made it famous. It stays powerful by knowing when to change. And she showed that immediately. Her first cover as editor-in-chief broke one of fashion's oldest rules. Instead of the perfectly styled formal portraits Vogue had become known for, she chose Israeli model Michaela Berku wearing a Christian Lacroix jeweled top with jeans. To some people inside the industry, it looked like a mistake. Luxury, fashion, and denim were not supposed to appear together on the cover of Vogue. The image challenged the idea of what fashion was supposed to look like. Anna published it anyway. The reaction proved she understood something others missed. Fashion was changing. People no longer wanted to only admire luxury from a distance. They wanted to see themselves inside the world being created. That one cover did more than introduce a new editor. It announced a new direction. Anna Wintour was not going to protect Vogue's past. She was going to control its future. But changing a magazine cover was only the beginning. The real power of Vogue was never just the pages. It was what happened after people saw them. Fashion runs on attention. And Anna became one of the people who decided where that attention went. A designer featured in Vogue could suddenly become one of the industry's biggest names. A celebrity chosen for a cover could enter a new level of cultural relevance. A trend highlighted inside the magazine could move from a niche idea into a global movement. Most people saw Vogue as a magazine. Anna understood it as an influence machine. And over time, that influence became something much larger than publishing. She wasn't simply documenting fashion. She was helping decide what fashion became. That reputation earned her a title few editors ever receive. Not just being an editor. Not just being an executive. A kingmaker. Some described her as the closest thing fashion had to a monarch. Because when Anna supported something, the industry paid attention. And when she ignored something, people noticed that too. But building influence inside a magazine was only one part of the empire she created. The next move would take her power outside the pages completely. The Met Gala already existed before Anna Wintour became involved. It was an important charity event for the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Costume Institute. But it was not the global phenomenon it is today. Anna saw an opportunity. Fashion did not have to stay inside the industry. It could become entertainment, a cultural event, something the entire world wanted to watch. Under her leadership, the Met Gala transformed into one of the biggest nights in fashion. The guest list became a symbol of status. The themes became global conversations. The red carpet became a stage where celebrities, designers, and brands competed for attention. The event became bigger than fashion. It became culture. And that was the pattern behind Anna Wintour's career. She didn't just participate in existing systems. She changed how those systems worked. By this point, her influence was no longer limited to one magazine. But that created a new challenge. The bigger the empire became, the more responsibility came with it. In 2020, Condé Nast made that reality official. Anna Wintour became the company's global chief content officer. Her influence expanded beyond American Vogue to other major publications, including Vanity Fair, GQ, Wired, Glamour, and more. She was no longer only responsible for one title. She was helping shape the editorial direction of an entire media company. But that expansion created a question. How long could one person continue carrying that much responsibility? For years, Anna had been known for her intense work ethic and constant involvement. She was involved in decisions large and small. The covers, the events, the direction of the brand, the future of fashion media itself. Then, in June 2025, came the announcement. Anna Wintour was stepping down as editor-in-chief of American Vogue. The reaction was immediate. After nearly 4 decades, how could Vogue exist without her? One staff member described the feeling as being like watching someone discover that God was stepping down from being God. That was how closely Anna had become connected to the identity of the magazine. But there was something people missed. She wasn't leaving. She was restructuring. Anna stepped away from the daily responsibilities of running American Vogue. But she remained global editorial director of Vogue. She remained Condé Nast's global chief content officer. She still held influence over the larger editorial structure she had spent decades building. The position changed. The power did not disappear. And that was the real strategy. Most people think giving up a title means losing control. But at the highest levels of leadership, power is not always about the position you hold. It is about the decisions you are still able to influence. Anna had spent 37 years building a system around her judgment. When it was time to change her role, she was not removed from the system. She helped redesign it. That is what separates a career from an empire. A career depends on one person's constant presence. An empire creates something larger, something that can evolve, something where the person who built it can step back without surrendering everything. Anna Wintour's greatest business decision may not have been one particular Vogue cover. It may have been understanding when to change her own position before the world forced the change for her. She didn't wait until someone else decided her time was over. She chose the moment. She chose the structure. She chose what stayed in her hands. But what if there is another version of this story? A version where Anna Wintour simply retires after 37 years. A version where she leaves behind a legendary magazine and becomes a symbol of fashion history. That would have been impressive, but it would not have been the full story. Because Anna Wintour did something much rarer. She built an empire powerful enough that she could change her role inside it without losing her influence over where it went next. In 1988, she changed Vogue by refusing to follow the rules. In 2025, she changed leadership by refusing to disappear. The woman who once shocked fashion with a cover featuring jeans did it again decades later. She changed the rules of what stepping down could look like. Because the true sign that someone owns an empire is not that they hold every position forever. It is that, when the position changes, they are still the one deciding what happens next. In the beginning, the easiest way for Lady Gaga to become successful was also the easiest way to disappear. The music industry knew exactly what it wanted from a new pop star. A recognizable image. A predictable sound. A personality that could fit neatly into a marketing plan. And Lady Gaga did something that confused almost everyone around her. She became less predictable. The stranger the world told her to become, the more she leaned into it. The more people told her to make herself easier to understand, the more determined she became to create something nobody could copy. Because before Lady Gaga built a business empire, she built something even harder to control. And the question that followed her entire career was never, can she become famous? It was, can someone this different survive in an industry built around making people the same? Before the costumes, the stadiums, and the global brand, there was an artist being told that her vision was too much. Too theatrical. Too unusual. Too difficult to sell. Early in her career, Lady Gaga has spoken about the pressure she faced to become a more conventional pop artist. The industry understood how to market a certain kind of star. Someone easier to categorize. Someone easier to package. But Gaga wasn't interested in creating something that only worked because it was familiar. She wanted every performance, every visual, every song, and every appearance to feel like part of a larger story. That approach came with risk. Because the same thing that makes an artist unforgettable can also make them difficult to sell. Record labels can promote a product. They struggle with something they cannot easily define. And Lady Gaga refused to simplify herself just to make other people more comfortable. That decision would eventually become the foundation of everything she built. When she released The Fame in 2008, the world saw something that looked completely new. The music was pop, but the presentation felt like performance art. She created characters. She created visuals. She created moments people could not ignore. The songs became hits, but the image surrounding them became just as important. Lady Gaga understood something many entertainers learned too late. Attention is not the same as influence. Anyone can create a moment. The challenge is creating an identity people remember. And Gaga became known for doing exactly that. But the same creativity that made her famous also created controversy. Because when an artist refuses to follow expectations, the audience does not always know what to do with them. One of the clearest examples came in 2010. The MTV Video Music Awards. Lady Gaga arrived wearing a dress made entirely of raw beef. The image immediately became one of the most discussed fashion moments in entertainment history. Some people saw it as shocking. Some saw it as unnecessary. Some saw it as a statement about identity, politics, and the way people are treated as objects. But regardless of interpretation, one thing was undeniable. Everyone was talking. And that was not accidental. Gaga understood that in modern entertainment, culture is created through moments. A song can be streamed. A performance can be forgotten. But a symbol can live for years. The meat dress was not just a costume. It represented the larger strategy behind her career. She wasn't trying to fit into pop culture. She was trying to reshape the conversation around it. And that strategy worked. But it also created the biggest challenge of building an empire around something as personal as creativity. How do you turn your identity into a business without letting other people take control of it? As Lady Gaga's fame grew, another opportunity appeared. The obvious path would have been simple. License her name. Partner with an existing company. Collect the money. Move on. That is how many celebrity businesses are built. The celebrity provides recognition. The company handles everything else. It is faster, easier, less risky. But that was never really Gaga's approach. Because the same person who refused to let a record label completely define her image was unlikely to hand over complete control of her business identity. So she chose a different path. One that required more involvement, more risk, and more patience. In 2019, Lady Gaga launched House Laboratories, a beauty company built around the same idea that shaped her entire career. Self-expression. The idea was not simply to create another celebrity makeup brand. The beauty industry already had plenty of those. The challenge was creating something that felt connected to the world she had spent years building. A brand based around transformation, identity, creativity, the freedom to become whoever you wanted to become. But the way she launched the company was just as important as the product itself. Instead of following the traditional celebrity beauty formula of entering major retail stores immediately, House Laboratories initially launched as an Amazon exclusive. It was an unusual decision. At the time, many beauty brands were built around physical retail relationships and traditional distribution. Gaga chose a direct-to-consumer approach. That meant more control, more direct access to customers, more ability to shape how the brand was presented. It was a business decision that reflected the same philosophy behind her music career. Own the relationship. Own the message. Own the experience. But ownership comes with a price. The easy version of a celebrity brand is often the least complicated one. A company develops the product. A celebrity attaches their name. Everyone moves on. House Labs required something different. Lady Gaga stayed closely involved with the brand's identity and creative direction. The formulas, the messaging, the visuals, the philosophy behind the products. That meant she wasn't just selling recognition. She was trying to build something that represented her. And that is a much harder thing to do. Because when your name is attached to something, every decision becomes personal. A mistake is not just a business mistake. It becomes part of your reputation. The same pattern appears throughout Lady Gaga's career. The moments that made her successful were often the same moments people questioned. The costumes people thought were too extreme became the images people remembered. The theatrical performances people thought were too much became the reason she stood apart. The creative risks people questioned became the foundation of her brand. Even her music career followed this pattern. During the art pop era, Gaga faced criticism and pressure around the direction of her work. There were expectations that she should return to a safer formula, a more predictable version of herself. But that has always been the central conflict of her career. The world wanted a simplified version of Lady Gaga. Lady Gaga kept choosing the complicated one. That choice has shaped more than her music. It shaped how she approached business. Because the real empire she built was not just a collection of products, albums, and performances. It was control over a creative identity. The ability to decide what her name represented. That is harder to build than a traditional company. A company can be copied. A product can be replaced. But a distinct identity built over years is much harder to take away. There is another version of Lady Gaga's story. A version where she listened to every person who told her to be less unusual. Where she removed the strange parts. Where she became easier to market. Maybe she still would have succeeded. Maybe she still would have become famous. But she would have built something much more ordinary. Instead, she chose the harder path. The path where every risk was visible. Every decision was questioned. Every creative choice had the possibility of failure. But it also had something else. Ownership. Because an empire is not always built by making the safest decision. Sometimes it is built by protecting the thing everyone else tells you to change. Lady Gaga's greatest business decision was not launching a makeup company. It was much earlier. It was the moment she realized the thing people wanted her to remove was the exact thing that made her valuable. The strange parts. The unpredictable parts. The parts that could not be easily packaged. She didn't build an empire by becoming what the industry wanted. She built one by refusing to become anything smaller. And after all these years, that may be the most important thing she still owns. Not just her music. Not just her businesses. But the ability to say, "This is who I am. And this is what I built."